Usually when I make one of these honest looks, my mind is already made up before I start scripting, and I use what we see and hear in the show to back my arguments in a way that I hope doesn't poison the well. This is impossible with Jaune arc. The consistency is just too non-existent, and this inconsistency was born from audience input. Jaune's first couple appearances left a foul taste in even the most adamant of Rooster Teeth fanboys that major changes were made to Jaune's character in latter volumes, and those changes still haunt the writing to this day. Blame falls squarely on Monty on this one. Yes, Jaune was pretty much supposed to be Miles' self-insert. Yes, Team Juniper was supposed to be Miles' team, the same way that Team Ruby was Monty's, but the first two volumes are so inconsistent in every regard that it no longer matters what they do. The creators are going to do something that contradicts what Monty did. Why is this? Well, my speculation is that, and there's no easy way to say this, Monty didn't care about the story or characters. Miles fell in love with creating the world and went full George Lucas. Carrie has been feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders and has been playing it safe, but throughout the first two volumes, and indeed seasons 8 through 10 of RVB, I never got the impression that Monty cared about anything other than the action. With that out of the way, let's go back on formula and show how all this haunts Jaune's characterization. He was first introduced as a literal gag character, a bit of goofy comic relief, and the male lead. He's Ruby's first real friend at Beacon. They're both well-meaning, nice, and have daunting legacies to live up to and might not be ready to fulfill their destinies. In the Emerald Forest, Jaune's role becomes clear. In these scenes, he's the audience surrogate. He's the one who doesn't know all this stuff about aura and semblance, but like too many other things, it's done in half measures. Let's take two scenes of semblance being explained and hopefully you'll see how things went wrong.
What? How did you...
Associated with a wielder's semblance is completely unique.
You're not one to back down from a challenge, Blake.
But I am! Even my semblance. I was born with the ability to leave behind a shadow of myself. An empty copy that takes the hit while I run away.
Some say your personality and character can define your semblance, while some claim that it's the other way around. Of course, there are still many who don't see a connection at all.
Even with him being out of his league, Jaune does fairly well against the Deathstalker. Team Juniper shows more actual teamwork and coordination than Team Ruby. In fact, the biggest problem with this fight is that it leaves one important question hanging in the air. Why does everyone have to go to the academies? And considering Yang mops the floor with a bunch of bandits, Blake and Sun were able to take on the biggest scrim this dude has ever seen. Weiss took down a bunch of Lancers that dropped several ships and a pro huntsman by herself, and Team Ranger takes on a decades-old city-busting Nuklavi all shortly after their first year. It's a question that'll never be answered. Apparently Oscar is already on par with Crow and he's only trained for a month. After, in my opinion, earning his position as Juniper's leader, we have the bully arc. I don't know what they were thinking when they wrote this 4-week stretch of episodes, but I hope Miles still loses sleep over this. What possessed Monty and Miles to do this? I'm sorry, but even if this was the best executed bully arc in existence, it would still suck more dicks than Pui Pui Prisoner at a German bratwurst roast party at Elton John's house. Sorry for that visual. Bully arcs are terrible on principle, and Jaune's managed to be a low-tier example. We find out some stuff about him, but as pointed out by some people in the fandom, he's never suffered any consequences. The closest thing to a consequence he has is that he gets beat up by Cardin. But that was already happening before we found out about the fake transcripts, and it's not like being unprepared is what landed him in trouble unless Velvet also faked her transcripts. Jaune's actions, motivations, and backstory come from 3 different characters. If he had any 2 pieces of contradictory dialogue, it would be bad, but 3? He doesn't want to be the damsel in distress, but then he acts lazy. He gets offered help, but passes it up because of bravado. Yet this whole bravado angle is completely dropped by the next volume. You can make the argument that all of this was him doing what he thought was cool, but that ship sailed when he became the victim of bullying. Jaune in this arc is a perpetual victim, woe is me type character. That's why this arc is insufferable instead of just plain bad. Though I would be remiss not to admit that the lessons he learns, even though it's a lesson he learned without consequence, is a good one. And all of this is facilitated by Ruby, who's supposed to be the main character, and who also became leader despite being relatively inexperienced and over her head, and this is why I ship these two so hard. Then Jaune is reduced to a gag character. Kids, there's a reason why magicians never reveal their secrets. Monty coming right out and saying that the reason why Jaune got wasted right off the bat during the food fight was because animating 8 characters in a fight is too hard goes a long way in describing what went wrong in fights since then. Jaune gets a lot of emotional screen time in Volume 2, Volume 2 being the most filler-ish volume of the whole show, and no one has any real progression, only deeper explorations. The writers still try to make him the everyman, but Miles botches it by over-projecting his own ego, or lack thereof. In layman's terms, Jaune refuses to go away. He has some good moments. The scenes with him and Ren are hilarious. Trying to court Weiss is a thing that I didn't hate. Jaune in a dress was pretty funny, but apparently killing a single Ursa, that's what counts as character progression? Despite decent turns as a comedic sidekick to the main cast, Volume 3 tried new ground, strategist, and it fails. An argument can be made that Jaune is just a terrible strategist, but I think it's more accurate to say that none of the writers know how to make a good strategist. So let's skip the Juniper vs. Braun scene since I already tore into that in Honest Look at the Vital Festival. For just a few episodes there, the writers finally found something worthwhile to do with him. He's still the same good-natured, goofy clown from Volume 2, but the focus is taken off of him and centered around Pyrrha, so I'll talk about all of that during her Honest Look. With that out of the way, I have to admit that Jaune has since turned into a bit of a Mary freaking Sue, and I can't even properly blame the writers for this. The fans wanted so much from him, the writers did so many things too early on to ever give the character any kind of consistency, but turning into a grim, serious edgelord wanting revenge for Pyrrha and grumbly disapproving of Crow and Ozpin is just about the worst thing they could have done. Luckily, they don't go full retard with it, but even going as far as they did shows where the writers are at. Listening to the rabid fanboys, the vocal minority is just about the worst thing you can possibly do when trying to craft a story. Instead of doing what they want with Jaune, they did what people wanted them to do with Jaune. They made him more of a main character. They made him the one with the vendetta against Cinder. They changed his weapon. They gave him a semblance that makes sure that the show will never have dramatic tension ever again, and they did all this in the name of fan service. And again, I can't put all the blame on the writers. Rooster Teeth has a very bad history with listening to the vocal minority, especially the people who give them a lot of money. But since Jaune is voiced by one of the writers and the one most obviously guilty of its faults, it isn't a good look. The fanboys are way worse than the writers, and the writers listen to them.
Who's the more foolish, the fool or the fool who follows it?
That's why they tried portraying Jaune as a strategist. That's why when it failed they made him the healer instead. That's why he tries stepping it up, yet shows no actual improvement. What the writers want to do with Jaune is actively fighting against what they think the audience wants. And that's really the gist of it. Jaune is damaged goods, even more than Yang. At least with Yang they eased into her and discovered what kind of character she should be as they were writing her. Had they done the same with Jaune, I think he'd be a lot better. I wish they did because at face value, I relate to Jaune a lot. There's a reason why so many of my lead characters have a similar hang-up. Having a family business or trade and having expectations put on you and being stressed about it as you fail to show the aptitude for the family trade is something I can personally relate to on a serious level. Having the hots for a girl who is so out of your league, who is so above the nice guy routine and becoming heartbroken over that is something I relate to. Jaune, if he were handled better early on, could have been my favorite character, but I can't see him as anything other than a disappointment. There's something very meta in that summation. I'm Mediocrity4. Thanks for watching.